vi holde på dansk?
Ja.
Har vi dansk på?
Om han hvad siger du? Kan du gøre på dansk?
Vi har ikke rigtig nogen danske bøger. Du kan læse på engelsk og tælle dansk.
Okay, så er vi engelsk. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 3, Text number 3. Shri Shuka Vacha.
Shri Shuka Vacha.
Bhagavat Purushai.
Bhagavat Purushai.
Rajan.
Rajan.
Yama.
Yama.
Pratihata Udyama.
Pratihata Udyama.
Patim.
Patim.
Vigyapayam. Asu. Yamam.
Yamam.
Sanyamani Patim.
Sanyamani Patim.
Shri Shuka Uvacha.
Shri Shuka Uvacha.
Bhagavat Purushai Rajan.
Bhagavat Purushai Rajan.
Bhagavat Purushai Rajan.
Bhagavat Purushai Rajan.
Yama Pratihato Yama.
Yama Pratihato Yama.
Yama Pratihato Yama.
Yama Pratihato Yama.
Yam ya Pratihato Yama.
Yamya Pratihato Yama.
Pratim Vigyapayama Sur.
Pratim Vigyapayama Sur.
Pratim Vigyapayama Sur.
Pratim Vigyapayama Sur.
Yaman Sangyamani Pratim.
Yaman Sangyamani Pratim.
Yaman Sangyamani Pratim.
Yaman Sangyamani Pratim.
Shuka Uvacha.
Shuka Uvacha.
Bhagavat Purushai Rajan.
Bhagavat Purushai Rajan.
Yamya Pratihato Yama.
Yamya Pratihato Yama.
Pratim Vigyapayama Sur.
Pratim Vigyapayama Sur.
Yaman Sangyamani Pratim.
Yaman Sangyamani Pratim. Shri Shuka Vacha.
Shri Shuka Uvacha.
Bhagavat Purushai Rajan.
Bhagavat Purushai Rajan.
Yamya
Pratihato Yama.
Pratim Vigyapayama Sur.
Pratim Vigyapayama Sur.
Yaman Sangyamani Pratim.
Yaman Sangyamani Pratim.
Shri Shuka Uvacha.
Shri
Shuka Uvacha. Bhagavat Purushai Rajan.
Bhagavat Purushai
Rajan. Yamya Pratihato Yama.
Yamya Pratihato Yama.
Pratim Vigyapayama Sur.
Pratim Vigyapayama Sur.
Yaman Samyamani Patim.
Yaman Samyamani Patim.
Shri Shuka Uvacha.
Shri Shuka Uvacha.
Bhagavat Purushai Rajan.
Bhagavat Purushai Rajan.
Yamya Pratihato Yama.
Yamya Pratihato Yama.
Pratim Vigyapayama Sur.
Pratim Vigyapayama Sur.
Samyamani Patim.
Yaman
Samyamani Pratim.
Shri Shuka Uvacha.
Shri
Shuka
Shuka
Uvacha.
Uvacha.
Bhagavat Purushai Rajan.
Bhagavat Purushai Rajan.
Yamya Pratihato Yama.
Yamya Pratihato Yama.
Pratim Vigyapayama Sur.
Pratim Vigyapayama Sur.
Yaman Samyamani Patim.
Yaman Samyamani Pratim. Shri Shuka Uvacha.
Shri Shuka Uvacha.
Shukadev Goswami said,
Shukadev Goswami said,
Bhagavat Purushai.
Bhagavat Purushai.
By the order carriers of the Lord,
By the order carriers of the Lord,
the Vishnu Dutas,
the Vishnu Dutas,
Rajan,
Rajan,
O King,
O King,
Yamya,
Yamya,
the order carriers of Yamaraj, Pratihata Ujjama, whose efforts were defeated. Patim, their master. Vigyapayamasu, informed. Yamam, Yamaraj, Sanyamani Patim, master of the city Sanyamani. Translation: Sri Sukadev Goswami replied, "My dear king, when the order carriers of Yamaraj were baffled and defeated by the order carriers of Vishnu, they approached their master, the controller of Samyamani, Puri, and master of sinful persons, to tell him of this incident." No purport to that verse, I'm reading the next also. Yamaduta uchu kati santiha shastraro jivalokasya vai prabho traividyam kurvata karma halabhivyaktihetava. Yamaduta said, "Our dear Lord, how many controllers or rulers are there in this material world? How many causes are responsible for manifesting the various results of activities performed under the three modes of nature? Sattva-gun, Rajagun and Tamo-gun." How about purport? Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that the Jamadutas, the order carriers of Yamaraj, were so disappointed that they asked their master, almost in great anger, whether there were many masters other than him. Furthermore, because the Yamadutas had been defeated and their master could not protect them, they were inclined to say that there was no need to serve such a master. If a servant cannot carry out the orders of his master without being defeated, what is the use of serving such a powerless master?
Wasn't this the one we just did?
No.
But
It was read, but it wasn't the main thing.
It was red.
It was read, but it wasn't the main slogan. So probably he just took it to point out something.
what? Am I reading the wrong verse?
No.
Okay. Om Jnana Timirandasya Yadunandana Shalakara Chaksurudam Yanatasma Sri Guru So in these two verses, we know the incident here. The sinful Ajamil is lying on his deathbed, and he, as we know, has throughout his life been very attached to the sensuous way of life, even though in the beginning of his life he was a Paka Brahmin, but due to seeing something going on in the street between a couple of Shudras, he became contaminated by lust, so much so that he actually got involved with a prostitute. But this prostitute had a lot of children up until the age of 80, where he had his last son called Narayan. So that is not exactly the recommended way of Vedic life. Of course, Pancha Shordam Manam Vrajet. At the age of 50, you're supposed to go to the forest and give up your attachment to family life. But it is not always that is the case. We also know from the story of the Mahabharata, Dhritarashtra, he was also not so inclined to go to the forest, but he ended up in a very shameful position of being served and fed by those whom he had actually intrigated against, basically for his whole life together with his sons. And then he ended up in a very shameful condition and having to maintain himself by Yudhishthira. Of course, from the point of view of Yudhishthira, it was okay to do that, but from the point of view of Dhritarashtra, it was very shameful. So it is not always that this Pancha Shordam Varanam Brajet is followed. This might have been more astonishing or surprising in the previous ages. In the age of Kali, it is not so surprising. Didn't we put some speakers in there? So why are you not putting the microphone on immediately then? And in Kali Yuga, of course, nobody is following this except for a few Vaishnavas maybe, to give up your attachment to the material world in the middle of life. And to go to the forest, of course, is very difficult in this age. Which forest are you going to go to? You know, Hotskop. Or what? Klamborg, Harskop. Where are you going to go? There might be a forest. I mean, I've heard that there are some war veterans who became so frustrated with their life after going to war in Kosovo and Bosnia that they just ended up in the forest. They cannot live in society anymore. Just become frustrated. Asocial beings. But that's not the... then the motive is complete frustration, which is a motive, I guess. And so that's a motive, but going to the forest should be, is one of the regulative principles in human life, according to the Varnashram system. You're a brahmachari, where you're a student, you're studying under your spiritual master to become a perfect gentleman. And with that knowledge you can enter Grihastha life up until the age of 50, and then at the age of 50 you're supposed to withdraw from Grihastha life and go to the forest to sit and meditate until you become consumed by a great big yogic fire and go back to Godhead. But maybe that's not exactly so practical. Actually, I once made an interview, just to sidetrack for 1 second. I made an interview with Sahotra Swami when he was still alive about the old European pre-Christian cultures. I don't know if any of you have heard that show on the radio. It's been probably rerun for 50 million times. But there he says that in the before the Christian era in Europe, there was of course these various Celtic and different kind of Germanic traditions, also Norse traditions. The Vikings had their... But it's interesting that in all these traditions there were similar ideas about human life. That at one point in life you're supposed to go to the forest and prepare yourself for death. And that was in, I think this is a Norse tradition, it's called Uti Seta. That's sidde ude. It's exactly what it means. Uti Seta. You sit out, sitting out, and then you concentrate on the und, which is the on, the prana. And you regulate the prana by different practices. So the same idea has been there in human society, and this is all different kinds of takeoffs of the Vedic culture, I should suppose. And then of course the Christianity came in whatever form it came. It's another story that's too much to get into, but the point is that in human culture, in every human culture, civilized human culture, there is the idea that at one point in life, and as Prabhupada says, as early as possible, he says at the age of 50 or earlier if possible, you should renounce a materialistic way of life and go to the forest. And our forest is of course Vrindavan, and of course also Prabhupada says various things according to in relationship to renunciation and vanaprastha. He says for a man who's been living in cities for his whole life, it's not so practical to go to the forest. But you can take shelter of the Krishna consciousness movement and chant 16 rounds and follow 4 regulative principles. And in this way, it will be very nice. So going to the forest as such can be equated with taking shelter of Krishna. You give up your attachment to the material world and take shelter of the temple. That's also a way of going to the forest. But Ajamil here, he did not go to the forest. He went on with family life up until the very end, and here he is, almost dying, and calling his son Narayan, Narayan. So his luck was that his son was named Narayan, which is the name of the Lord. So, because he was calling for Narayan, then immediately the Vishnudutas came. And the Yamadutas were wondering. They were, of course, very ferocious creatures, these Yamadutas. And it's interesting, sometimes in various movies and stories that come from normal people, they also see these, when they die, they see these ugly creatures coming towards them to catch them. There are stories like that. So the Yamadutas, they're not even only appearing in these stories of the Vedic literature, but they're actually people who don't know anything about the Vedic literature. They see them too. Sinful people. There are stories like that. So these Yamaduts, they're serving, of course, a Vaishnava, a Mahajan. Does anybody know the verse about the 12 Mahajans? Can you recite the verse for me? Panditji? No? What is it? Anyway, there are 12 authorities of Vedic knowledge, and they're called the Mahajans. And unless you're a Mahajan, you cannot invent a religious principle. So, this is the prerogative of the Mahajans to give religious principles. And they are Narada Muni, Swayambhuvan, Shukadeva Goswami, Yamaraj, King Janak, Bali Maharaj, Shiva, and who else? Yamaraj, I said Yamaraj. Swayambhumana, I think I said who else? Bali Maharaj, Shiva, Shambhu, that's Shiva. Bhishma, of course. Bhishma is there, one of the Mahajans. Kapil is one of the Mahajans. Anything else? Is that 12? I lost my count. But there are 12 Mahajans listed in the Bhagavad who can who can inaugurate religious principles, and Yamaraj is one of those. So he's a very great master. He's a very powerful person. He is in charge of keeping track of the sins of all sinful men. And as Prabhupada says, there are more sinful men than pious men, so he has a lot to do. So he has knowledge almost at the level of the Super Soul, Yamaraj. He's an empowered living entity, and he's living in his plutonic kingdom, as Prabhupada calls it. It's called Samyamani. Samyamani is Samyamani Puri. Is his city, and it's Prabhupada describes this is somewhere between the earth and the sun. Exactly what that means, I have no idea. And that is where he's residing. And he has his servants who are, yes, they're serving a Vaishnava. True, but they're very ferocious creatures, and they may not be totally aware about all the intricacies of the material universe. So they were wondering. Of course, they didn't know anything else than serving Yamaraj, so they were wondering, are you not the God? You know, are you not the Supreme Personality of God? Is there anybody above you? They were very disappointed. Because, of course, if you're a ferocious person, then you become very respectful to somebody who's stronger than you. It's like when Bhim, he was going, now we're back in the Mahabharata again, Bhim, he was wondering to go to this forest, what is it called? Kailas? He was going to pick up some herbs, I think.
Yeah?
Not Bhima. Yeah. It was an incident where Bhima, he was walking up on a hill,
he have flour for soup?
No, yeah, he was going to get some, I can't remember exactly what he was going to get, but then he stumbled over a big monkey.
Oh yeah, that's flour.
There's a flower, yeah. And he, according to etiquette, you cannot overstep an animal, you have to go around it, but he was lying in the middle of the trail, so he had to move his tail, you know. And he said, no, I cannot move, I'm so tired, you know, can you please help me? And he tried to move his tail, and he could not move it. Bhima, the strongest man on earth, could not move his tail. And then he really endeavored. He just what do you say, spit everything. He stretched his muscles to the limit and tried to move his tail, but still, even though his muscles were quirking and squeaking, nothing happened. And then, as all strong men, he became very respectful when he met somebody who was stronger than himself. That's the nature of strong, heavy guys. When you meet somebody who's stronger than yourself, you become very respectful and they always start to worship these persons as if they were God. So the Yamadutes, they were pretty sure that Yamaraj must be the greatest person in the universe, and so they were almost disappointed. How can we continue serving you? You're not the strongest. So that is the lazy intelligence of the Vaishnava. He goes to serve the strongest of them all, because then he knows that there is no problem. If I serve the biggest master, then I also get the biggest reward. Of course, that is not the motive of the pure Vaishnava to get any reward. But if you want protection, then who is a better master to serve than Krishna? Now, of course, service is the nature of the living entity. The jiva cannot avoid service, and in any condition we're always serving Krishna. Actually, nobody can avoid serving Krishna at any moment. The people walking on the street here, walking on the walking street, everybody on earth, they nati vidus swagatim Vishnu. They don't know that the goal of life is Vishnu. They have no idea, but still, they're always serving Vishnu. Always. Because, as we learn from the Bhagavad, there is the material energy, which consists of the three modes of nature, is in its innermost nature nothing but actually a manifestation of the Supersoul. Everything is really a manifestation of the Supersoul in the ultimate issue, because the Supersoul is the maintaining principle within every atom. And the Supersoul is nothing but the third expansion of Vishnu, or maybe even more remote. It is actually Kshirodakshay Vishnu, expanding in the universe. Lord Baladev expands into the first Chaturvyuha, who expands into the second Chaturvyuha, who expands into Mahavishnu, who expands into each universe as Garbhodakashay Vishnu. And from that Garbhodakashay Vishnu, he expands to Kshirodakshay Vishnu to maintain even the atoms and the living entities. So, Matstani Sarvabhutani, Naracha. Actually, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that he is in, everybody is in him, everybody is within him, so to speak, because he's expanded himself to be the universe. He is the universe in the form of the Super Soul, but he's employing his energies. His person becomes the source of all energies, including the Super Soul, material energy, but ultimately everybody is serving in the material world, even though they're not serving Krishna directly, they are serving the Super Soul. And if you're not serving the Super Soul, then at least you're serving the material energy. But the material energy is conducted by the demigoddess Maya, who is ultimately the servant of Krishna. So, we cannot avoid service. The soul is minute and cannot avoid service. The only way you can avoid service, the only way you can avoid becoming a servant, is if you perform very, very heavy punya, very strong punya, very pious karmic activities to become elevated to the post of a demigod. And you can become an Ishvara, you can become somebody like Lord Indra, you can become somebody even like Lord Brahma. But even those positions are not permanent, they are temporary positions. So there's no need to go up and down in the material world like children on a Ferris wheel, as Prabhupada says. Rather, avoid this indirect service to the material energy, which we fall victim to in so many ways. Sometimes even in spiritual life there can be contaminations of wanting to become, gain some position within the movement or something like that, which is all various contaminations of wanting to serve the material nature. So the Vaishnavas, they want to become purified so much so that their service is directed to Krishna. Service we cannot avoid, but we want to find out who is the greatest master and then serve him directly. So the Yamadutas, their reaction here is understandable and to some extent very intelligent, because if they didn't know there was anything higher than Yamaraj, of course it's a fair question. Are you not God? Is there anybody above you? How many controllers can there be in material nature? Just imagine if there were more gods in the universe competing with each other. Sometimes, of course, it would seem like that. Sometimes in the war, I think even in the Mahabharata, there is an incident where Lord Shiva fights Lord Krishna, isn't it? Is that the Mahabharata?
I think that's one of the Purana.
Yeah, there's an incident where Shiva fights with Lord Vishnu or Krishna, and in the end, Lord Vishnu defeats Lord Shiva with his ice weapon or his coldness weapon. What's it called? Yeah, it's in the Krishna book. I know, sometimes since I read it. So it could seem like there's some kind of rivalry between the gods, but actually there's no rivalry, because actually Lord Shiva is just an expansion of Lord Vishnu. Lord Shiva, it's like Prabhupada says, Lord Vishnu never contacts the material energy, but when he does, he becomes Lord Shiva. It's an interesting contradiction, huh? You can find it here and there. Krishna never contacts the material energy, but when he does, he's Lord Shiva. So how to understand that? Well, he's never in his form as Krishna or Vishnu. He's not in contact with the material energy. But when that pure existence becomes mixed up with ignorance, then he becomes Lord Shiva. To understand that is very difficult. It's just let's hear the message of the previous acharyas and accept it, and in this way become Krishna conscious. So, the last question here, what is the use of serving such a powerless master? So everybody is powerless, except for the power that they get from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which was realized by somebody like Prahlad Maharaj, when his father, Hiranyakashipu, was wondering, where are you getting your strength? Where are you getting all this strength? From the same place as you. Even the demon is getting his strength from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So everybody is powerless unless they get their power from Krishna.